everyone, welcome to Elvis Presley, past, present and future, where we are continuing on with our Elvis journey. Well, Elvis is about to set foot back into the United States after being away for 2 years. I wonder if he had any idea where his career would take him. He had his doubts. He had no idea what was going to happen. But I wonder if in his mind he had any idea of how huge he would actually become in the movies, his concerts, his songs. Interesting. Let's continue on our journey. Remember in an earlier episode where Elizabeth Stefaniak met Elvis for the first time in the movie theatre? Remember she asked one of Elvis's friends to get her an autograph? And then another one of Elvis's friends came and got her and escorted her up the aisle to meet Elvis? Well, that was Rex Mansfield. And less than 2 years later, Rex would escort her up another aisle. But before that, Elvis would have a brief romance with Elizabeth. And also, it led her to her role as a go-between for Elvis and his German fans. As we know, Elizabeth was born in Germany, but had moved to the United States when her mother married an American soldier. Elizabeth couldn't get a job, but Elvis soon solved that problem. Elizabeth worked primarily with Elvis's father and soon learned that she was only one of several of Elvis's girlfriends. The night before he was to leave Germany, he asked Elizabeth if she would like to go back to the States with him, that he needed someone who spoke German to go through his fan mail. Elvis's grandmother, Minnie May, had grown close to Elizabeth and realised that she could be hurt by Elvis's infatuation with a lot of other women and with his latest infatuation with Priscilla. Minnie May began to tell Elizabeth that Rex would make some girl a good husband. And she told Rex that Elizabeth would make somebody a good wife. She did it all in secret, because she knew that Elvis would not approve of Rex seeing Elizabeth. Elizabeth began to see Rex in secret, and they fell in love. Elizabeth was torn between her love for Elvis and an ordinary soldier named Rex Mansfield. Elvis was possessive. Rex did not want to offend Elvis. Elvis never really knew that Rex and Elizabeth were dating until they left Germany. For Rex, who is there with Elvis, dating a former Elvis girlfriend bothered him. It was a big thing for him to overcome. Rex said, if Elvis had found out I was dating Elizabeth, he would have kicked us both out of his inner circle and out of his house. It was against the rules. No one could date anyone that Elvis had dated. Elvis then offered Rex a job as his official right-hand man back in the States. The job that would eventually go to Joe Esposito. Rex knew that if he accepted the position, it would be impossible to keep dating Elizabeth. They knew that they would not have a successful partnership being around Elvis 24/7. Elizabeth eventually chose Rex, and they both turned down Elvis's job offers. Rex told Elvis about his love for Elizabeth, and Elvis, to Rex's amazement, was very supportive of their romance. and asked Rex to make sure that he looked after Elizabeth. Rex and Elizabeth married in June 1960, but they never saw Elvis again. While his German fans were sad about Elvis leaving, he was happy to go back to the USA to see his family and friends again after a 2-year absence. The strain of stepping back into his superstar life would be all the more difficult to deal with. Film and recording contracts were already in place, and Elvis was aware that Colonel Parker, the movie industry and recording industries were anxiously awaiting his return to work. While this will have gone some way to alleviate his fears about rebuilding his career, he now had to contemplate how to move forward with his life. This was exacerbated by his own mixed emotions. Although the charm and good humour for which he had become known had certainly not deserted him, the Elvis that returned to America was a far more serious-minded individual than the one who had first donned his army uniform. During his time in Germany, he won the hearts of the older generation at home. He had been given a glimpse of how his career would develop. The first half of Elvis's life was already over. The second half, that would carry him forward towards August 1977, had only just begun. Elvis was flying back to America. His military flight touched down for refueling at Prestwick Airport in South Ayrshire, Scotland, on March 2, 1960. Prestwick was, until 1966, home to an American Air Force base. It was meant to be a closely guarded secret among personnel in the force that Sergeant Elvis Presley will be landing from Frankfurt at 7:30 in the morning. But seemingly, Elvis was not informed about the stop either, and didn't know that his desire to enter British soil would soon be met. There to greet him officially were Base Commander Colonel Russell Fisher, Chief Executive Officer Major Ed Miller, and Admin Officer Major Ben Backus. Freelancer Neil Dryborough recalls that the 3 military men escorting him were slightly uncomfortable. They only let Elvis say a few words before he was ushered into a car and taken off to the officers' mess. There were murmurings about the colonel, who was spending an awful lot of time with someone who was, after all, a lower rank. Word had already spread locally that the Star's flight would be landing at Prestwick Airport. Hundreds of screaming teenagers, mostly girls, drowned the noise of the jet engines when Elvis stepped out of the plane. He shook their hands, signed their autograph books, and posted for pictures. Then, bewildered, he turned and asked an Air Force lieutenant, "Where am I?" The Air Force had planned its short stay to the split second. But Colonel Russell Fisher says that all depends on what Sergeant Presley wants to do. He may change the whole schedule. But Elvis was most cooperative. Although he wouldn't remove his hat, he said, "I'm sorry, I can't take it off," he said to reporters. "It kind of breaks the uniform, you know what I mean?" He spoke to the reporters for 5 minutes. Then he was whisked away in a staff car to say hello to buddies in the local NCO club. This teenage club where he was met by the music of one of his early recordings, Heartbreak Hotel. Elizabeth Steele's mother worked as a cleaner on the base, and she remembers being taken there as a 10-year-old to stand among the children of US servicemen. She recalls, "Although I'm ashamed to say it, but for me at the time it was a toss-up between Cliff and Elvis. Once I found myself up close to him, it was very, very exciting. I moved towards him, right up next to him. I touched his arm, and I found myself screaming and shouting as well. I couldn't help myself." Elvis won. Elvis's physical appearance is something everyone who met him that night mentions. Even Scotsmen in their 60s and 70s, who don't usually talk about flawless skin, shining black hair, exceptional broad shoulders and slim waists, they were talking about him. The photos taken that night confirmed that Elvis smouldered with a quite exceptional beauty, and without the constraining influence of Colonel Parker, he was able to mingle with the public. After the short stopover in Prestwick, Elvis, along with 79 other soldiers, boards a plane for McGuire Air Base in New Jersey. Elvis's plane arrives at Fort Dix during a snowstorm at 7:42 a.m., which quickly reached blizzard proportions. But that did not stop Elvis's fans going to the base to greet their idol back on US soil. Also on hand to greet him were more than 100 representatives of all types of news media. A great bevy of newspaper, magazine, TV, radio and newsreel people braved the treacherous highway conditions to reach the base. A press conference was organised for that afternoon. Among the press corps present that day were representatives of both Variety and Billboard. The lengthy accounts that appeared in both entertainment publications offer some interesting sidelights into what is perhaps Elvis's best known press conference. One account read, Sergeant Elvis Presley was mustered out of the army in a production worthy of one of the 9 films he's scheduled to make in the next 3 years. Elvis looked tired but fit. Among those present were actress Tina Louise and Nancy Sinatra, appearing on behalf of her father, Frank. And of course, Colonel Parker, who was right in the middle of it all. He was throwing out some big numbers, no doubt exaggerated, concerning Elvis. He claimed Elvis had earned $1.6 million in recording royalties while he was in the service. He also announced that now Elvis was out of the army, he would earn $850,000 from films and TV in 1960, including $125,000 for appearing on Frank Sinatra's TV special on May 12. It was noted that Tina Louise, who was dressed in a tight white dress with her bright red hair peeking out of a turban, made Elvis blush when she asked him, "Are you still going to use suggestive movements?" Elvis replied that his movements were natural and there would be little change in them unless his fans wanted a change. Nancy Sinatra gave her gift from her father to Elvis. They were some white shirts, and she posed for pictures with Elvis as well. Although the official date of Elvis's release from the army was scheduled for March 23, at 9:15 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, March 5, Elvis was officially discharged from the army. Elvis and fellow soldiers catch a bus from the orientation lecture to the Fort Dix cashier in the finance building for their mustering out pay. And there he is with his pay. He received his mustering out check of $109.54 and was honourably discharged. Elvis and the Colonel left Fort Dix in a limousine for a hotel in Trenton, New Jersey. That night, Elvis boarded a train, the Tennessean, bound for Memphis. Looking out of the rear window of the Tennessean, Elvis saw the nation's capital and the Capitol Dome as the train pulls away from D.C. At a stop in Roanoke, Virginia, Ed Thomas of WSLS-TV snagged a 5-minute interview with Elvis. Ed Thomas said, "A celebrity interview is like gold. It's wherever you find it." This one, Elvis granted to Ed, he did while on the last car of the train. It took place in a most unusual location. And there is Elvis, standing in the doorway of the train, being interviewed. When Memphis reporter Bill Burke of the Memphis Press joined the train in Grand Junction at 6:15 a.m, he was the only reporter who slipped onto the chartered Presley train as it made its way from New Jersey to Memphis. Bill Burke recalls it was 6:30 on the morning of March 7, 1960. "We came on at the last stop the train would make before getting into Memphis. Every journalist in the country was shooting for it. Starting from the time Presley left Germany, we knew when the train left Knoxville, then Nashville, that he hadn't been interviewed. So, 1 hour out of Memphis, when the train stopped to pick up mail, we just jumped on. Lamar heard us. I had known Lamar for several years. He said, 'Hi, Bill, what you got in mind?' He said, 'I came to interview the boss.' Lamar told us, 'I don't think you can right now. I think you better leave the train.' Well, there was a toilet at the end of the hallway and Elvis was in there brushing his teeth. He came to the door, toothpaste all over his mouth, and said, 'Well, what's up?' Lamar told him, and Elvis said, 'Let him in.' So I sat down with him and asked him about his immediate future, how he felt about being in the army. It looked like I was just visiting a friend." Bill Burke got $5,000 from Photoplay magazine for his exclusive interview, at a time when he was only making $6,000 a year. Bill Burke recalls Elvis's first concert after getting out of the army at Ellis Auditorium in Memphis. He said, "I was standing right below him on the stage, and after about 3 or 4 songs, people started screaming and yelling all around him. He looked down at me, winked a knowing wink as if to say, 'Hey, I'm back.'" At 7:45 on March 7, the train arrives in Memphis, and 200 fans, reporters, and the just plain curious were waiting for Elvis. It was snowing. There was an icy wind, but the crowds chanted, "We want Elvis," as they massed behind a 6-foot-high wrought iron fence. "It was nice to have you aboard," said the conductor, H.D. Kenema, shaking Elvis's hand. "Thank you, sir," said Elvis, squaring his shoulders and plunging back into the life he had once known. He walked along the fence, shaking hands through the bars and recognizing familiar faces. Amongst the crowd was Gary Pepper, head of the new Elvis fan club, the Tankers. Elvis spoke briefly with various friends and fans, then indicated to Colonel Parker's brother-in-law and aide, Bitsy Mott, that he wanted to meet with Gary Pepper, who was a 27-year-old cerebral palsy victim. Gary Pepper was also holding a Welcome Home Elvis sign above his head. Bitsy wheeled Pepper through the crowd, and him and Elvis had a brief meeting. Elvis was seen to bite his lip, reported the newspaper, seeming to hold back tears when Elvis was told it was time to move on. He said to Gary, "I'll see you later, pal." Gary and Elvis became lifelong friends. Gary passed away in 1980. Then Elvis was gone, scooped up in his old friend Captain Fred Woodward's squad car, arriving at Graceland 30 minutes later with lights flashing and sirens screaming. The Graceland gates swung open. The car went through at nearly 30 miles an hour. Then the gates closed. The king was once again on his throne. In the afternoon, there was a press conference in Vernon's office, which was a small building attached to Graceland, just behind. The Memphis Mafia made a point of welcoming Elvis with a gift. It was a cake in the form of a guitar. Now I'm actually going to play, guys, the actual audio recording of this interview. I'll be putting up pictures of Elvis during the interview, but I thought it'd be nice to actually hear Elvis speaking and the whole press conference word for word. So I hope you enjoy.
Ready to go?
Ready. Ready when you are. I'm always ready.
Okay, we're going to start at this. This is not part of the questioning, but did you get the black-eyed peas when you got home?
I haven't eaten anything yet.
Haven't eaten anything?
No. I've just been looking around more or less since I've been back.
Now, to get down to the serious side of it, Elvis, now that the Army's part of the past, can you give us in detail some of your future plans?
Well, the first thing I have to do is to cut some records. And then after that, I have the television show with Frank Sinatra. And then I have the picture with Mr. Wallace. And after that, I have 2 for 20th Century Fox. And after that, heaven knows, I don't. I suppose it'll keep me busy the rest of this year, you know. After that, I don't know.
Well, Elvis, now you're really home. How does it feel?
It's pretty hard to describe, I'll tell you. It's hard to get used to it, you know. I mean, I've been looking forward to it for 2 years, and all of a sudden, here it is. It's not easy to adjust to it.
Now that you are back, as you look back on your 2 years in the service, what was the most important thing that happened to you during your 2 years, whether it was overseas or here in the States?
Well, there were a number of things that happened. I had quite a few interesting experiences. Slept out in the snow, ate sea rations, you know, all the regular thing. But I suppose the biggest thing of all is the fact that I did make it. I made it just like everybody. I mean, I tried to play it straight, you know, like everybody else. And I made a lot of friends that I never would have made otherwise. And all in all, it's been a pretty good experience, you know.
Elvis, you still have time to serve now for Uncle Sam. Have you given any thought as to where you're going to serve your reserve training?
Well, sir, I will be on the reserve status here in Memphis at the reserve center here. But they have a clause which covers people with traveling jobs. If you have a traveling job or if you live too far away from your reserve center, they put you on standby. Whereas you don't have to make their meetings, but you are subject to be called at any emergency or anything of that nature.
Elvis, one of your future commitments, as you mentioned, is the Frank Sinatra show on the ABC television network. Do you have any idea of when this will be aired?
I really don't know the exact date. I would imagine it's somewhere around the 1st of May.
If you'll forgive me, I have one other part to my question. We understand, speaking of Frank Sinatra, that there has been some rumor about Nancy Sinatra and yourself. Is there a romance in the making here?
No, sir, I'm afraid not. I only met her in Fort Dix. And she gave me a gift from Frank. And it was very brief. I think she's engaged to Tommy Sands. I don't think he would appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Elvis, you think the music has changed since you've been out of the service? I mean, since you've been in the service?
Possibly, yes. I can't say, really. I haven't been here long enough to even know. Excuse me. The only thing I can say is that if it has changed, well, I would be foolish not to try to change with it, you know. But as of now, I have no reason to change anything.
As to your acting, you have stated you would like to be a more serious actor. And do you plan to possibly go to some school or some dramatic school?
Well, it wouldn't hurt me any to go to school, but I learn best by experience. I never was very good in schools of any kind. And it's going to take me a long time and a lot of experience.
But that is your ultimate ambition?
But as at the present time, it really is. That's what I want to do.
Elvis, you were asked about Nancy Sinatra. How about any romance? Did you leave any heart, shall we say, in Germany?
Not any special one. There was a little girl that I was seeing quite often over there. That her father was in the Air Force, and actually they only got over there about 2 months before I left. I was seeing her, and she was at the airport when I left, and there were some pictures made of her, but it was no big romance. I mean, the stories came out, the girl he left behind, and all that. It wasn't like that. I mean, I had to be careful when I answer a question.
Elvis, in your service life, which did you find the most difficult, when you went into basic training, or when you got over into Germany, over with the experienced soldiers? Which gave you the hardest time?
Well, basic training wasn't hard for me at all. It was harder afterwards, after I had gotten into a regular outfit. Not the service itself, but just the surroundings, and I was in a strange land, and the outfit I was in, they had quite a bit of field duty. We stayed in the field 6 months out of the year. And it gets cold in Germany. It snows quite a bit. And it was pretty hard to adjust to.
One thing further on that, do you have any advice for the boys your age who are now going to have to put in a certain amount of duty in the service?
Well, the only thing I can say is to play it straight and to do your best, because you can't fight them. They've never lost yet, you know? And you can't fight them. So you can make it easy or you can make it hard on yourself. I mean, if you play it straight, get the people on your side, let them know you're trying, you as the Army would say, you've got it made. And if you're going to try to be an individual or try to be different, you're going to go through 2 years of misery.
Elvis, when do you think you'll record again? And when you do you think you'll lean toward the ballad-type music or the more upbeat sounds?
Well, as far as when I'll record, I really don't know. Possibly this week or next week. And what I'll record, I don't know yet. I've got quite a few songs to choose from. I've collected over the 2 years, but I don't know exactly what type or what instruments I'll use, whether it be the Firestone Orchestra or Monty Vonnie or what. I really don't know yet. Shoot.
You said that at the train that that you wanted to get back to what you were doing, and of course that is singing and entertaining. And I take it from that you really enjoy what you're doing, or what you were doing before you went to service.
Oh yes, I do. In fact, that was the hardest part of the entire military service, is being away from it.
Being away from the fans.
Just being away from show business altogether. That was the hardest part of all. It wasn't the Army, it wasn't the other men. It was that. It stayed on my mind. I kept thinking about the past all the time, contemplating the future. And
Elvis,
that was the hardest part.
We know your family status has changed since you went into service. Are you going to keep Graceland? Do you have plans of moving away from Memphis, or what?
No, sir, I have no plans for leaving Memphis.
And you're going to keep Graceland?
I'm going to keep Graceland as long as I possibly can.
Well, was this Christmas tree a surprise?
Well, since it's March, it's a little surprise. That's the tree we used in 1957.
We can leave the Christmas tree long enough. About your tonsils and the tonsillectomy that you were contemplating while you were in the service, did you deliberately ask that it be held off until you could get to the United States and a local doctor?
No, sir.
Or did they improve that much?
I didn't ask that. They don't like to perform surgery of any kind in Europe. They don't like to. If it's an emergency, they will. But I took penicillin and wonder drugs or whatever they call it.
You
and
had
I got
no
okay.
recurrence, huh?
I had 2 attacks of tonsillitis when I was there.
Elvis, did you like the food over there outside of the Army? When you would go out, did you like that type of food?
I never went out. So
You never ate out in a restaurant?
I never ate in a restaurant the entire time I was in Germany. It's funny. I either ate in the mess hall or at home. One of the two. I never went anywhere while I was in Europe except to Paris. I went to Paris and on a leave, and that was all.
Now, how did the fans respond to you over there as compared to here in the States?
Well, it's a pretty difficult question to answer because anything I'll say, it might sound a little like I'm bragging, but it was pretty much the same there as here.
They had seen a lot of your movies.
And the records and so forth. I'd like to go back on a tour over there someday, all of Europe, because the only thing they know about me is what they've read, records and the movies and so forth.
Elvis, this is not in the form of a question, but I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you home for everybody in Memphis and the South.
Well, thank you. You'll never know how happy I am to be here. Someone asked me this morning, what did I miss about Memphis? And I said, everything.
I asked that question on the train this morning, and we used it several times. And you said anything you mentioned about Memphis that I missed that much.
Well, sir, I've been here for quite a while, about 14 or 15 years now. I pretty well know Memphis. I thought I did till I drove home.
John, if you get any more now, I'll have to start charging you.
Everybody feel to come all the way into the station on the train for the first time.
Huh?
How does it feel to come all the way to your destination on the train? You normally get over.
I couldn't believe it. I couldn't. Oh, I know what you're talking about now. Escape and evasion, they call it in the Army. But I don't know. I mean, I was hoping there'd be some, people there at the station, and I knew there'd be a lot of my friends there, personal friends, and I wanted to come into the station. I wouldn't have gotten off anywhere else, I mean, this time is different.
If we'd only known that yesterday.
How long do you think you will be back in Memphis, recuperating or getting adjusted back to civilian life?
I would say a couple of weeks. That's about all.
Thank you.
Okay, is that all?
There we go. Hope you enjoyed that press conference. Let's continue with our episode. Anita Wood could hardly wait for Elvis to come home. On March 3, 1960, Anita went to Patsy Presley's house to await Elvis's arrival at Graceland. The entire family was excited. Though Elvis knew that Anita was eager to see him as he was her, he had asked her to allow his family some time with him first, so that no one's feeling would be hurt. It killed Anita hearing him to say that, but in her heart she knew he was right. So she agreed to wait for his call, telling her to come on over. Patsy Presley and her family insisted that she come along with them when they got word that they were to go over to Graceland. But Anita stood firm and said she would stay behind and wait for Elvis to call her. As it happened, she didn't have to wait very long. About 30 minutes later, Patsy called her and said Elvis keeps asking, "Where is Little? Why isn't she here?" Patsy said to Anita, "You better hightail it over here, girl." So Anita grabbed her purse, got in her car, and drove as fast as she could to Graceland. She entered Graceland through the back door and made her way through the kitchen and living room, hugging various members of the family, some of whom she hadn't seen for 2 years. She saw Elvis standing in the music room. His back was to her. He was dressed in regular black clothes instead of his army fatigues, which threw her a little, as she felt as though everything had frozen in time. She could barely breathe. Elvis must have sensed her presence, because right then he turned around and he saw her. He stood there with his hands on his hips and said, "Why, come here, little," he said with a smile. Anita ran to him with outstretched arms, and he scooped her up and twirled her around. "I can't believe that you are here, and that we are here together," Elvis said. "I love you, little. I'm so glad to see you. You look wonderful." Anita told him that she loved him too, and that she had missed him so much. They hugged, and they kissed, and they held each other for the longest time, Elvis hardly letting go of her the entire night. Every time they would mix or mingle with someone, Elvis would lean over and kiss her on the forehead. Elvis was at home, and so was she. After a little while, Elvis sat at the piano with Anita and started singing and playing. This didn't last very long. As he kept looking into Anita's eyes, he finally said, "Come on, little," and took her upstairs to his bedroom. It seems he could not wait another minute to have her all to himself. The next day, March 8, Elvis visited his mother's finished grave for the first time. These 2 years away from his career have been a time to mature. He is also worried constantly that his lengthy absence might have damaged his career progress. So March 2, 1960, Elvis had his first post-Army recording session in Nashville. Some of the recording work is for the album Elvis Is Back, which will hit number 2 on the Billboard Top Chart. The album includes the single Stuck on You, which is rushed to the pressing plant and packaged in a generic sleeve without waiting for orders. Debuting at number 84, it took only 3 weeks to hit number 1. Sessions continue in early April. 2 songs he recorded on March 21, Stuck on You and Fame and Fortune, were chosen as the 2 sides of his first post-Army single. And he would perform both these songs live on the Frank Sinatra Timex television special on March 21. After completing 2 additional songs for the album, Elvis boarded a train from Nashville to Miami, Florida, arriving in Miami the following day. Elvis checked in the Fontainebleau Hotel, the venue where the show would be taped. He spent the remainder of the week rehearsing the show, which was scheduled to be recorded on March 26. He met with Frank Sinatra to promote the show. In a carefully staged meeting that was photographed for press release. For the special, originally titled Frank Sinatra's Welcome Home Party for Elvis Presley, he would receive $125,000, an unheard sum at that time for a single television appearance. Sinatra was not pleased with Elvis's fee, knowing full well this exceeded his compensation for hosting the entire program. He was aware that a Presley appearance would attract huge ratings for the hour, something that his 3 previous specials had failed to do. Colonel Tom Parker also made it very clear to him that this sum was for only 2 songs, approximately 6 to 8 minutes. Parker had hoped that showcasing Elvis on Sinatra's show would reintroduce him to an older audience, a more mature target market less likely to dismiss him in favour of the next teen idol. The television special would bring together two of the music's world's biggest stars, each with their own legendary titles. Sinatra was known as the Voice, and Presley was known as the King. Realising the publicity from such a media event, Parker was intent on seeing this opportunity run as smooth as possible for his client. Elvis and Frank had been musical rivals since the 1950s, and on occasion they had each been asked their opinions on the other. Frank had written an article in a French magazine in 1957 describing rock and roll music as sung, played and written for the most part by cretinous goons with sly, lewd, dirty lyrics. It manages to be the martial music of every side-burned delinquent on the face of the earth. This rancid-smelling aphrodisiac I deplore. When asked his reaction to hearing this, Elvis responded, "He has a right to his opinion, but I can't see him knocking it for no good reason. I admire him as a performer and an actor, but I think he's badly mistaken about this. If I remember correctly, he was also part of a trend. I don't see how he can call the youth of today immoral and delinquent." Now the press, either known or unknown to Frank and Elvis, were attempting to cause a rift between the pair. They, however, had nothing but good things to say about each other when they asked specifically how they felt. Frank, when specifically asked about Elvis's singing style, responded, "Only time will tell. They said I was a freak when I first had a hit record, but I'm still around. Presley has no training at all. When he goes into something serious, a bigger kind of singing, we'll find out indeed if he is a singer. He has a natural animalistic talent." For his part, when asked again about Sinatra's previous comments regarding rock and roll, Elvis was just as kind to Sinatra. "I admire the man. He's a great success and a fine actor," Elvis said. On March 26, 6:15 p.m, taping for the show took place at the Fontainebleau Hotel. It was Elvis's first appearance on television in over 3 years and his first serious performance since 1957, making Elvis nervous about how he would be received. Colonel Parker, perhaps due to nerves of his own, had arranged for as many Elvis fans as possible to fill the audience, although at least half of it was still made up of Frank's fans. Elvis's first, very brief appearance on the show had him entering in army uniform. Elvis joined the other guests on the show, including Nancy Sinatra, Frank's daughter. Elvis was to sing a part of It's Nice to Go Travelin'. His other two songs, Fame and Fortune and Stuck on You, had only been released days before the taping of the special. Elvis also performed with Frank, each singing a song the other had made famous, taking turns in singing a verse each. Elvis sang Witchcraft and Frank sang Love Me Tender. Both songs were sung in the swing style that Sinatra was famous for, although critics were divided on how well it had sounded. They said Elvis had difficulty with the melody of the Sinatra hit, but the harmony between the pair, I Love Me Tender, came off in good style. After approximately 8 minutes on screen and a quick promotional plug for his new film G.I. Blues, Elvis was gone. Reviews for the show were generally good, although not everyone was impressed. Life magazine said Sinatra does his best singing of the season and referred to Elvis as still a reigning favourite after 2 years in the Army Billboard magazine. The exasperated Dynamite was, to put it politely, a bit overrated. Presley has much to learn before he can work in the same league with pros like Sinatra, Joey Bishop, and especially Sammy Davis Jr. The New York Times was a little harsher on Elvis when they reviewed the show. While he was in the service, he lost his sideburns, drove a truck, and apparently behaved in an acceptable military manner. But now he's free to perform in public again, as he did on last night's Frank Sinatra show. Although he became a sergeant in the army, as a singer, he has never left the awkward squad. There was nothing morally reprehensible about his performance. It was merely awful. Now, Ed Sullivan, the man who only 3 years earlier had called Elvis a real decent fine boy when the young star last appeared on his show, also gave a very harsh critique of the Sinatra special. Writing in the New York Daily News, he said that Elvis, minus his sideburns, has substituted what the ladies probably would call a hightail hairdo. His hair is so high in front that it looks like a ski jump. Sullivan also criticised Parker's ability to acquire $125,000 for 8 minutes work. Colonel Tom, using the logic of a farmer, is a firm believer in not giving a hungry horse a bale of hay. However, Sullivan had failed to take into account the fact that the special did not belong to Presley. It was a Sinatra show, and there were other guests that had to be given airtime. On April 21, 1960, Elvis begins filming video and recording audio for his first post-army movie, his 5th film, GI Blues. Oh, there we go, guys. A lot of information in that video. A lot of research, a lot of hours, but hey, it's the Elvis story. It's the true Elvis story. I'm trying not to leave anything out. I'm trying to let you know every little thing that happened to Elvis along the way. Hope you guys are enjoying it. See you next week when we start the movie years. Hope you all enjoyed. Hit the like, subscribe, comment down below. Tell your friends if you're liking this series. And you all have a good week. And I'll see you next week. Bye.